Hey there, this is Patrick.
And Natalie.
And we're here in 2018. The BloodStream Podcast has arrived, and we wanted to kick the new year off right with a little bit of gratitude. And how do we show our gratitude, Natalie?
By saying thank you, Shire.
Why does Shire?
Because they're the exclusive sponsor of our wonderful podcast.
And we couldn't do this without you. Thank you, Shire, for enabling Natalie and I and our whole team, enabling us to produce this resource for the bleeding disorders community. We are grateful for your support, and so we say thank you, Shire. Hello, and welcome to the BloodStream Podcast, episode 20, January 15th, 2018. I'm Patrick James Lynch.
And I'm Natalie Lynch.
On this episode, Shire and Roche are locked up in a patent lawsuit related to Hemlibra. What does this mean, and will it impact patients' ability to receive Hemlibra? We discuss in today's comment segment. A recent New York Times article examines why the United States spends so much more money on healthcare than any other country in the world, in a story presented by Natalie in our Like segment. And entrepreneur and hemo dad Mark Kenny shares his compelling story and perspective during our Share segment. Plus, Natalie and I sit down with hemo mom, and my mom, Susan Lynch, to get her perspective of being introduced to hemophilia in the mid-1980s and how she navigated being a single parent of 2 kids with severe hemophilia during the advent of recombinant products and prophylaxis. All that and more coming up on this episode. Welcome to BloodStream. Natalie, we did it. 2018, we made it out of a up-down, sideways, spaceship-oriented 2017. That was kind of nuts, and here we are in 2018.
It's 2018, yeah.
I even said it in the beginning. I said
I
it
know.
correctly.
I was looking at you being like, I
had it wrong in the outline, but I got it right when it came time to record. I remember in school, like for the first, I feel like I was still going like February 13th, 2001. No, 2002. It would take until like March to get the year right.
Yeah, you're always erasing it, and if you wrote in pen, you're like trying to turn whatever the last number is into the new number.
Absolutely. You can make a 4 or 5. You can make it's a big 5 because you got to get the left side way up there, and then you got to but you can make it happen.
And there's kids right now having that struggle.
That's right. We feel for you guys out there. Keep writing. Keep writing. It gets better.
By March.
It gets better by March. Do you have any? So we had kind of a fast and wild holiday season. Any big? I know it's a couple weeks out now since the holidays, but people haven't heard from us, so it's maybe still somewhat fresh. So any big takeaways?
It was a quiet Christmas. I mean, in a nice way.
Quiet.
Yeah, I feel like pretty low key.
Okay.
You don't agree?
No, I have a different definition of quiet. In fact, I would say it was a very loud Christmas.
I mean, like, there were less people at the house and, a little more low key. Mm-hmm. I mean, my family's not quiet, if that's what you're talking about. I come from a loud family. But I feel like the general essence of the holiday was smaller.
And we had a nice, quiet New Year's. You were working a little bit and, we figured it out. But now we're in January. Now we're in 2018. New year, new potential, new hope, new resolutions.
Yeah.
So, yeah, here we are, 2018, January, episode 20. That's a big number. We hit 20 with this, which is pretty exciting. So a couple little pieces of housekeeping before we get into today's segments. At the end of last year, the World Federation of Hemophilia launched a platform that Believe Limited helped create. As you know, if you've been listening for a while, we often escort the WFH's humanitarian aid program to developing countries around the world to profile through content, through photo and video, how the humanitarian aid program is helping the bleeding disorders community in these various parts of the world. And this particular piece that launched was on government support in Armenia. Believe Limited's head of production, Josh Bragg, and lead producer, Rob Bradford, accompanied people from the WFH to Armenia in late last year to do just that, profile how government support in Armenia was changing the lives of people with hemophilia and bleeding disorders. So if you check out the link in the program notes, they've launched this platform. It's a combination of journalistic copy, photo, and video in this kind of cool Tumblr-esque webpage I'm cycling through now. A lot of short videos, short clips, photographs, little blurbs of copy. So I'd recommend checking that out. WFH's Government Support in Armenia. You can find the link in the program notes. We have a new episode. This is the pod. Now I got to do all the podcast updates. We got a new episode of the Ask the Expert podcast with Lori Kelly, the founder of LA Kelly Communications and Save One Life. Huge community person of interest. And on January 22nd, our next episode of the Ask the Expert podcast is going to feature Dr. Guy Young speaking about inhibitors, the history of inhibitor treatment, and about Roche Genentech's Hemlibra. So in the comment segment today, we're going to talk about that lawsuit, which came about at the end of December. At the end of this month, January, on Ask the Expert, you can hear Dr. Guy Young, leading pediatric hematologist, big into the research and treatment of especially pediatric patients with inhibitors. You can hear him talk all about Hemlibra. It's a great interview. That's going to be coming out on the 22nd on the Ask the Expert podcast. We have a new episode of the Powering Through podcast from our Powering Through conversation at the National Hemophilia Foundation's annual meeting in 2017, and it features Cheyenne Ganzel. She's Miss Teen, Williamsport, Pennsylvania, and a VWD advocate. Elijah Nobles, a camp counselor and home health professional living with hemophilia B, and Jimmy Olga here, the founder of Greek Supply Company, who is living with sickle cell disease. 3 really interesting, really different speakers. You can check out that podcast at poweringthrough.org/podcast, or you can check out all BloodStream Media podcasts at bloodstreammedia.com. Just a couple other quick updates. Chris Bombardier, we've talked about him a lot on this podcast, and in fact, you're going to hear a very interesting update related to Chris on that Ask the Expert podcast with Dr. Young coming out on January 22nd. So, little teaser for that. But he is closing in on his final summit. In fact, by the time that this podcast launches on the 15th, he may have climbed it already, but Mount Vincent in Antarctica is the last mountain of the 7 summits, and once he summits this mountain, which he will, he'll become one of less than, I've seen different numbers, but we're going to put it at less than 500 people ever to climb the 7 summits, the highest mountain on each continent, and he has severe hemophilia B. So that is not a small accomplishment. If you haven't been, you can follow along with Chris, facebook.com/adventures of a hemophiliac, facebook.com/adventures of a hemophiliac, and you can keep up with us here at BloodStream Media. You can't see it, but I did a very cool hand gesture to signify just how hip and cool we are. It was a good hand gesture, right, Natalie?
Sure.
Yeah, perfect. Keep up with us on social, facebook.com/BloodStream Media, at BloodStream Info on Twitter. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the BloodStream Podcast on iTunes, on your phone's podcast app, or wherever you do listen to podcasts. And if you have subscribed, thank you. We would love for you to leave us a review on iTunes. Those actually go a very long way in iTunes' indexing of podcasts, and we'd like to continue to kind of rise up through the rankings as best we can. So if you've already subscribed to the BloodStream Podcast, the Ask the Expert Podcast, and the Powering Through Podcast, please consider leaving us a review for one or all 3. You could be super generous. I know it's not December anymore, but it can still be the generous holiday spirit here in January. So leave us a review on any of those if you so please. And of course, as always, you can send feedback, ideas, or submit your short essay for consideration as a future share segment by emailing mailbag@bloodstreammedia.com. We'll now kick off our like, share, and comment segment with the like section of the like, share, comment segment.
That was intended to be a jab.
Not a jab. It's a playful reminder is what I would categorize it as.
Sections and segments.
I know I'm the only one who cares. But today's like section, why the U.S. spends so much more money on other nations, on healthcare than other nations. A New York Times article that Natalie's going to walk us through. So Natalie, take it away.
Yeah, so this came out on January 2nd, and the U.S. spends twice as much on healthcare in terms of like a percentage of its economy as other advanced industrial nations, totaling $3.3 trillion or 17.9%. That's a lot.
The gross domestic of the GDP. Yeah, that's a ton.
And just a few decades ago, it was much closer to our peer nations. So the article kind of explores, like, are we sicker? Do we use healthcare more? What happens during the stays and the visits?
Right.
And, there are several studies and several experts that this article cites. And it says that it's not the usage. The usage has not gone up, at least commensurately with the spending. And it's not increased sickness because we are healthier than we were 2 decades ago. Mm-hmm. And then what happens during stays and visits, which is coined care intensity. I've never heard that term before.
I've never heard that either.
But I thought it was an interesting term. Does play into it. And many experts say they can't tease out care intensity and price. Most people just say it is generally the price of healthcare here is significantly higher and has continued to go up, and that's what the increase is.
Is that the price of everything? Because we hear about the cost of prescription drug medication. Obviously, we have some firsthand knowledge of that. But does the article get into, is it the price of all services? Is it medication specifically?
It's the combination.
It's everything.
Yeah, it's drug prices, it's physician fees, and then what they're doing per stay, the care intensity is also greater. So not only are they doing more per stay or per visit, but those things that they are doing cost more.
Well, you know what's interesting about that, too, is how much of that is, quote unquote, necessary. Not to derail us too much here, but we've spoken about this with regard to your work as a doula and how often in the birthing process, things at a hospital are just kind of automated when really it should be a conversation with the patient about what their options are. And one option may be no intervention, no fee to charge, no service to provide, or intervention, service to provide, fee to charge. And, you know, you can speak to this better than I can, but you know, my takeaway has been that oftentimes hospitals just automate the service, the intervention at a fee for charge.
Yeah,
rather
absolutely.
than have a discussion with the expecting mother.
And I think that is true culturally across the board here in the U.S. for other services, other health services.
Things are just automated.
Yeah, and I mean, this kind of goes a little like sociological, anthropological, and a little off the article, but it is interesting because we don't, and we're not really taught to say like, hey, what is that? Why are you doing it?
Right.
You know, there's this inherent trust. So, you know.
Which I think is shifting. I do think that like the generation behind us or younger millennials, I do think there's more of a speak up, your voice matters, you know, than the traditional kind of patriarchal structure of.
Well, and be curious too. And I mean, I just think paying attention to, you know, speaking maternally, the friends of mine who have had babies and then get their itemized bill from the hospital and they're like, a Tylenol was $332.
Right.
What? Or like, I wouldn't have asked for that ice pack had I known it was $62.
Right. Sorry, I thought it was ice. I'm sorry. Crazy me.
You know, and things that they consider personal care products, like in labor and delivery, if, you know, someone comes and says, do you want a fan?
Right.
Like, sure, yeah, I'm hot. Bring the fan in. Well, that's a fan for you to keep because it's considered a personal care item. And now that's going home for the price of $152. So, you know, we do charge a lot and, you know, and there's more being offered, whether necessary or not, per visit. And the healthcare sector here in the U.S. grew 4% annual rate, while the overall economy from 96 to 2013 only grew at the rate of 2.4%. So
say that again. That was 2.4 versus
4.
4%.
So yeah, the healthcare sector increased 4%, while the general economy, general spending was just 2.4, which is just interesting to show that like it, you know, that you can tease out that, you know, like things in general cost more. That makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that the healthcare sector is growing even faster than that in terms of cost.
Right.
And the article proposes a few ways to combat this, one being an all-payer system, like Maryland currently has, and
all-payer?
An all-payer. So that is where insurers and public programs pay the same. And then there's single-payer, which, you know, is definitely a hot topic.
Yeah, it's been raised in a very significant way since the primaries of 2016.
Yeah, so the authors of this article suggest those two as potential fixes to the growing costs. But it's just interesting to read these numbers. The overall concept, I don't think, was shocking, but it was interesting to see, wow, yeah, we do twice as much on healthcare than other industrialized nations.
Well, it's also a reminder as to why we had to kind of fight hard to advocate for not changing the healthcare system in such profound ways with a really shoddy process and with not enough time for debate and amendments to legislation that was proposed, because it is a humongous part of our economy. Put aside the actual health implications and that this is people's lives, but it's a humongous part of our economy. So to so flippantly want to change it is, I mean, in my purview, quite clearly politically motivated and not governmentally motivated or motivated by an interest in
the people.
The people, yeah. So
but yeah, so right. It's an interesting article. January 2nd, New York Times Health section, if you want to check it out, or in the program notes.
Thanks, Natalie. This month's Share segment comes from Hemo Dad, and I like to call him a voluntary hemo dad, and you'll find out in just a moment why, and entrepreneur Mark Kenny. Mark is a very active member of the bleeding disorders community and the inhibitor community, along with his partner, Amberlyn Gould, and their family of four. Or family of six, them plus four. They were active in the community in Kansas and Missouri and New York, now in California, in Los Angeles. And we asked Mark if he would be willing to share his unique and compelling story and perspective for this month. And he said yes. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Mark Kenny and his piece on entrepreneurialism and being a voluntary, my word, hemo dad.
My name is Mark Kenny, and I'm a father to 4 hemophiliacs living in Southern California, 2 girls and 2 boys. The boys have severe hemophilia with inhibitors. The oldest tolerized, but the youngest still has an active inhibitor. A little bit about me. I'm an entrepreneur working primarily in healthcare, but this wasn't how I envisioned my adult life when I was younger. I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, and my dreams were of becoming a rock star and making movies. And when I graduated high school in 1993, I wanted to go to USC for film school, but I wasn't the greatest student, so I didn't earn scholarships, and tuition was far more than I could afford. So I began my degree studying political science at the University of Missouri St. Louis. After a couple of years, unhappy with the prospect of entering the workforce with the political science degree, I decided to join the military. I needed a break from school to kind of figure things out, what I wanted to get my degree in or whatever. And I also honestly needed money to finish my degree, so at the time it seemed like a good idea. Fast forward to a decade later, I was living in Wichita, Kansas, when I met my partner, Amber. When we met, Amber had 3 kids that all had hemophilia. I was not very familiar with the disorder at the time, but I did go to school with a friend of mine from college had hemophilia, so I was aware that it was a bleeding disorder. I just didn't really know how it worked back then. Anyway, there was no treatment center in Wichita, so whenever the kids had to go to the hemophilia treatment center, Amber would have to travel about 2.5 hours each way, and she often spent weeks at a time in the hospital. And that was my introduction to life with bleeding disorders. And though there was a lot I didn't understand, I loved Amber and the kids, and I wanted to help. So taking on the role of hemo dad felt right, even if it was unfamiliar. Because Amber and I weren't married, I was limited in how I could help her. For example, I had no legal guardianship, so I couldn't take the kids to appointments or make medical decisions. So instead, I tried to help by learning as much as I could about the disorder, the treatments, how they work, what new therapies were on the horizon, what resources exist to help us navigate the disorder so that Amber wasn't alone on this journey and so she wouldn't become discouraged along the way. We tried to become subject matter experts on hemophilia. It took many years of attending both local and national conferences and events, but Amber and I learned a lot over the past 10 years, and we became more involved, and we were able to make better informed decisions, which helped us to feel more confident as parents. One of the things I quickly realized was that if I was going to be a true partner to Amber, in the sense that I'm her helper, I needed a career in which I could work remotely so that I could travel when necessary or help out with the kids at home, like getting them to and from school and activities and things like that. And at that time, I was working as a museum manager, and although my boss was very understanding and supportive during some very difficult times, I knew that it wasn't sustainable for me to be gone for several weeks with little to no notice. And it wasn't fair to me or my family to use all my sick days and vacation days on hospital stays or local and national educational events. I decided to complete my degree in communication with an emphasis in electronic media. I felt that this degree would give me the flexibility that we needed as a family for me to work remotely, and it has. So my journey to becoming an entrepreneur evolved more from our family's needs than my own aspirations. Now I look for opportunities to use my entrepreneurial skills to help the bleeding disorders community. For example, I recently participated in the Hacking Hemophilia event that was in Boston. It was organized by MIT Hacking Medicine, CSL Behring, and the National Hemophilia Foundation. My team comprised of 3 hemo dads, including myself, and we had 2 primary goals. 1, to simplify the process for people doing infusions, and 2, to reduce medical waste. So we came up with something we call an infuser pack. It's a customized infusion package made specific to each patient's needs and tastes. For example, the right size needle, right size syringe, latex-free supplies for those with a latex allergy. Little ones can choose whether they want Batman or Dora Band-Aids or Star Wars. So rather than receiving all the supplies that one could possibly need in separate packaging, which results in too much excess and panic attacks when your kid has a bleed and you got to gather everything that individual would want or need would be sealed together in one unique package made especially for them. Patients and caregivers could select and order their preferred supplies through an app or website, and we would coordinate with specialty pharmacies to deliver the infuser packs with their medication. And our thought is that a product like this could reduce the response time for critical injuries such as head bleeds, as well as simplify the infusion process, reduce risk, improve adherence, and give people in our community some degree of control in an aspect of their lives where they often feel like they have none. My teammates and I were honored to win first place at the hackathon because there were so many great ideas presented. We're now using the prize money to continue developing the infuser pack. Quick note, Amber developed the concept years ago and has ensured that every one of our pharmacies send prepackaged infusion supply kits for our family. I just stole her idea with permission and took it to Boston to develop it further into a business-to-business model so that every family can benefit from infuser packs the way that we have. I never dreamed of becoming an entrepreneur, but now that I am, I can't imagine a better way for me to contribute to my family and to the bleeding disorders community. If you have ideas for a new product or thoughts on how to improve the lives of people with bleeding disorders, I encourage you to follow your curiosity and take risks, even if you might not consider yourself an entrepreneur. There's so much opportunity for innovation, and no one knows more about our community's needs than we do.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mark Kenny, for sharing that piece with us. You can find the written copy of Mark's piece on the BloodStreamPod.com blog. Just go to Bloodstream. Are you yawning into the microphone, Natalie?
Could you hear that?
Yeah.
Oh, shoot.
Of course we could. You have a microphone in front of your mouth. Oh, my goodness. All right. Look, Mark's blog can be found at BloodStreamPod.com/blog.
Yawning at Mark's blog. I was just
It's
yawning.
impossible to know what you were yawning at. You said nothing and then yawned, so we're all just left in the mystery of it all. BloodStreamPod.com/blog, and you can find Mark on Instagram at Mark T. Kenny. Thank you again, Mark. Please wake up, Natalie. We have another segment to do.
Okay, I'm here.
And rounding out the like, share, comment with our comment segment for this month, a piece on a recent lawsuit that has come to light. The Shire and Genentech are in a legal battle over Hemlibra. So I'm going to cite primarily from an article in Biopharma. There's also an article in Reuters, and they're sharing a lot of the same quotes and pieces, and there'll be links in the program notes. But essentially, here's the kind of the headlines. Shire has asked a federal court to restrict Roche, which is the parent company of Genentech, the producer of Hemlibra, from creating, transporting, and marketing its recently approved hemophilia drug Hemlibra in the United States. The request came in the form of a motion for preliminary injunction, and Shire expects the court to make a decision on the motion in mid-2018, according to a December 14th statement on their website. And while the injunction is currently sealed, a Roche spokesperson explained in an email to Biopharma Dive that the motion seeks to prevent the Swiss pharma company from providing Hemlibra to U.S. patients with hemophilia, a move resulting from an ongoing legal dispute between the two companies over whether Hemlibra infringes on a key Shire patent. I think that lawsuit that it's referring to, or that legal dispute rather, started in May of last year. So, yeah, to go back a little bit, in May, Shire subsidiaries Baxalta Incorporated filed a lawsuit against Roche Genentech claiming that the company's development of Hemlibra, which again was formerly emicizumab or Emi, formerly ACE910, this is the big subcutaneous product we've been talking about for quite some time. So the Shire's claim is that it infringes on a patent known as the 590 patent for an isolated antibody or antibody fragment that binds factor IX to factor IXA. This current motion for injunctions is the latest development in the suit, and it's particularly timely that Hemlibra recently gained FDA approval. Now, Shire maintains that until the courts decide on the motion, and again, that's slated for this summer, or middle of this year, there won't be any impact on hemophilia patients. Shire says that it has proposed allowing those who are already taking Hemlibra or who wouldn't adequately respond to bypassing treatments to have access to the drug. Now, this is pulled from the statement on their website. I don't know what who wouldn't adequately respond to bypassing treatments means exactly, but we'll come back to that in a minute. Roche, however, discredits this and contends that Shire would essentially close off patients from treatment who they, in their mind, believe are in need of Hemlibra. And I'll just read this piece from a Roche spokesperson. This, too, came in an email to Biopharma Dive. Quote, Shire and Baxalta have demonstrated a profound disregard for patient well-being by seeking this preliminary injunction that prevents patients who may benefit from Hemlibra from receiving it. These actions harm the hemophilia community. We believe it is also inappropriate for Shire to dictate which patients should or should not receive Hemlibra. That decision rests with the treating physicians and patients and is supported by the FDA approval of Hemlibra for all patients with hemophilia A with inhibitors. Again, Shire maintains that until the court's decision on the motion for the preliminary injunction, expected this summer, is made, that there will be no patient impact. So that's kind of where things stand. What does this mean for us? What does this mean for patients? In my opinion, if you or your child has severe hemophilia A with inhibitors and you are interested in speaking with your doctor about getting on Hemlibra, talk to your doctor, talk to your care team, and advocate for your right to do so. This legal, big business stuff is frustrating, and unfortunately, it's symptomatic of a for-profit, free market healthcare system that, as we started to touch upon earlier with the piece on the healthcare costs that Natalie presented, that system both enables the funding for the extraordinary amount of money that goes into research and development, particularly for rare disease drugs, but it also results in messiness like this. So advocates and advocacy organizations may get involved with a more robust advocacy push in some direction. We'll see at the time that we're recording this. I've spoken to a couple of people and leaders in the community about this, and we'll see what kind of organized advocacy efforts take place. But right now, the focus for individuals with severe hemophilia A and inhibitors should be on getting access to the product you need for optimal care. So if any entity tries to get in your way, call your local NHF chapter or your HFA member organization or your local legislator and push, politely and professionally, to get what you need. That's the most important thing. This patent lawsuit is going to go on. I have heard as well there's the potential for, and of course this is kind of always a potential, but in this particular case there's potential that maybe it gets settled outside of court, maybe sooner than not, but at the latest, when the sealed documents are opened up by a judge in the summer, there should be movement one way or another. Now again, going back to what does that from that statement from Shire, the company says it has proposed allowing those who are already on Hemlibra, which is a small amount of people because it was only just approved, or who wouldn't adequately respond to bypassing treatments to have access to the drug. Now, I don't know how we're quantifying who wouldn't adequately respond to bypassing treatments. I don't know where we're marking the cutoff because these bypassing treatments and people's responses to them vary pretty greatly, and you start to get into things like quality of life and more challenging metrics to really measure and present in a meaningful way. So to the point made by the representative from Roche, who is calling the shots on what patients do or do not have access, I don't have a clear information on that. These statements don't necessarily seem to make that clear. Frankly, I don't know if there is a procedure in place yet. But what matters for you listening, you or your loved one, if you have severe hemophilia A with inhibitors and you want to be on this new subcutaneous product that treats severe A with inhibitors subcutaneously once a week, that shows no immunological response, no negative immunological response, talk to your doctors and push. You have a right to it, and I cannot imagine that it is in Shire's best interest to put up a big fight to prevent you from getting that medication. That is not in the company's best interest. So I have to believe that those who should be on Hemlibra will get on Hemlibra, but just be prepared to make a push because unfortunately the makeup of our system has resulted in this really messy, big business, high money legal dispute going on. And that's where things stand, at least as of the time of this recording. So that's it. That's the end of this piece.
Thank you, Patrick.
You're welcome, Natalie. Hope you enjoyed this month's Like, Share, Comment segment. Reminder that if you would like to submit a short essay for consideration as a future Share segment piece, you can email us mailbag@bloodstreammedia.com or connect with us on facebook.com/bloodstreammedia or on Twitter @bloodstreaminfo and let us know that you are interested. Before we get to our interview segment here, I just want to say a big thank you to our premier and exclusive sponsor, Shire, for enabling the BloodStream Podcast. We appreciate your support, and so we say, thank you, Shire. And now, it's time for the BloodStream Podcast, episode 20, January 15th, 2018, sit-down interview segment. Natalie, who is today's sit-down interview segment guest?
My favorite mother-in-law,
Clever.
Susan Lynch.
And why do we talk to my mom?
We're talking to your mom today to get her perspective on what it was like to be a mother to two boys with hemophilia, what it was like to find out that she had a child with a chronic condition, you know, since there was no family history, and then her choice to have a second son knowing this information.
Some interesting stuff came up around that, huh?
Yeah.
I didn't know all that. So, all right. Well, listen, enjoy the conversation with my mom, who is a very reluctant participant in this interview.
But she's ready for her next podcast, I think.
She is. Well, you know, like everybody else, you turn the mics off and then people start talking even more. And it's like, hey, no, do that on the mic. But I guess that's on me as an interviewer. I got to do a better job. But no, she did a great job. Thank you, Mom. And here you go. Here's my mom, Susan Marie Lynch. All right, so here we are with today's sit-down guest. So she's just getting ready. Last looks happening here.
Makeup and hair.
Making her feel real embarrassed. Mom, how many podcasts have you done so far to date?
None.
You got to hold the mic a little closer to your mouth.
None.
You look very excited to do your first today.
I'm very excited.
So we're here today with my mom, Susan Lynch. Say hi, Mom.
Hi, everybody.
And we're here to talk about, she's so happy to be doing this, but she shows it in her own special way. So we wanted to talk to you today, about your perspective on, obviously the podcast is about hemophilia and people have heard me talk about it a bit. But your perspective as a mother, and maybe just to start off talking about when you first found out, we didn't have any family history of it. So
Correct, yeah.
Can you talk about how we first found out that hemophilia was in the family?
Well, you were about 8 months old, and actually for the few months before you even were 8 months old, maybe from 4 months old, you had a lot of bruises under your arms where I would pick you up. And then when you were starting to crawl around 8 months old, your knees got very bruised. So I asked the pediatrician about it, and he told me you probably had a liver enzyme deficiency.
Wasn't his first thing just like, oh, he's just a bruiser?
Yeah, he said, my wife bruises very easily. But I found that summer, it was summertime, that I was bringing you to the town pool and keeping a T-shirt on you because people would stare. And
Because
I knew
he
that
was so bruised?
And I knew that wasn't normal, correct, yeah. So then we went to a hematologist, and actually when the doctor came into the waiting room, he said without even examining you, he believed you had hemophilia. He knew right away.
And where was that?
That was in where?
Yeah.
In North Shore Hospital.
Gotcha. Okay. And when you heard that, we were actually talking about this, Natalie and I, in the car on the way over. You know, we hear about how doctors, when they're in med school, hemophilia is a sentence and a paragraph and a chapter in one book, and that's about it, unless you specialize in hematology. For you as a nurse, did you have any prior understanding of what hemophilia was?
I didn't even know how to spell the word. I knew nothing about it. And actually, that doctor told me, you will one day know more than the doctors. And he was right. And
how quickly did that day come?
Oh, I'd say it happened within a year. I learned all about it, just living it and, investigating and being your mom.
And when you say investigating, so there's learning by doing and by being a mom. But what were the resources that were available?
Well, they were limited. Mostly, I would talk to the nurses at the treatment center. They would, tell me things, what to look for, and just from my experience, I learned, about your joints and if they were red, if you started limping. There was no internet to look anything up, so in that way, you didn't have too much to go to.
Now, you didn't connect with the hemophilia chapter in New York or with other moms, some people take comfort from making those connections to other parents or with the chapter. Was that something that wasn't of interest, you didn't know about, or what about that kind of community aspect?
I didn't have any desire for a community aspect.
That's okay, you could say that.
I mean, I'm not a joiner. I'm not, I've never attended a PTA meeting.
Right.
So that's not my thing. I didn't need it. Obviously, though, as an adult now, you need it, which is great. You know, it's a support to you. But back then, I didn't need it. I had any questions I would ask the nurses or the doctor during our, biannual visits. I didn't have a need to sit in a room with a bunch of other people and discuss it.
No, fair enough. But you did, so, there's often talk about how hemophilia doesn't just affect the child that has it, but it affects the whole family. We were just talking before we started recording about sibling dynamics, and, it affects the siblings, it affects the parents, it can put a stressor on the parents' ability to work and make money and blah, blah, blah. And being a single parent with 2 kids with hemophilia, I imagine that was not a small consideration, how to balance what it meant to care for 2 kids with hemophilia while also being a single parent, but setting up a support structure. How did you think through that when you were having to make those kind of decisions?
Well, of course, I always had my mom, your grandmother. I worked nights. She worked days. She would come to us. I would walk out. I would walk in. She would walk out. I mean, so I was very blessed like that. I had your aunt and uncle. For a while, I had your grandmother. So I had great support. And I was very up on insurance. I was always with the insurance companies. I knew what to do. I never had a lapse in insurance ever. I had very good experiences with the insurance companies, actually. I've never spent 1 penny out of pocket on hemophilia. And I know that's not the norm. But with all the different insurance companies we've had in my job, I found them to be very, very good. I know that's not the thing to say, but that was my experience.
No, it's not the thing to say. I mean, I think one of the bad perceptions is that insurance companies are the bad guy, and it's like, well, no, it's the way the system is set up is flawed.
And actually, you know what? One time I did. I don't even know if I ever told you this. I had ordered something. It was during one of the shortages, and then I got it, and they jumped through hoops to get it to us. I think it was bad weather or whatever was going on. And I wrote the CEO of Blue Cross at that time a letter, handwritten letter, telling him how happy I was with Blue Cross and he's never let me down. And it was very emotional. He wrote back.
What'd he say?
I don't know. He was like, "Oh, I'm glad that you're happy with our service. We aim to please, blah, blah, blah."
He probably doesn't get too many of those letters.
I can't imagine.
Yeah, but I remember that. Yeah.
That's incredible, all the people that go into caring for somebody that has hemophilia possible. Like, I know it's a couple times I've gone to the manufacturing plants, and these people they're scientists, and they're at plants, and they're engineers, and they're technicians. They're not in the hospital, they're not at the clinic, they're not at patient meetings, they're not at camps. They never interface with actual patients or families, but what they do is actually take the stuff and turn it into the medicine that saves lives. It's kind of incredible, but they're always doing it behind closed doors.
They don't get any credit, right?
It's amazing when you think all the different people that are involved. And then when there's been we talked about this. There's been that new drug that was approved that right now is for patients that have severe hemophilia A and inhibitors. And we know inhibitors well because I had one growing up, and how much they kind of can change it's almost like a different diagnosis when a child has a particularly troublesome inhibitor. So when that was introduced, how did that change your thinking about hemophilia? How did that change the family dynamic?
The inhibitor? Well, you suffered quite a bit. It was very hard for you, and I saw the difference with Adam, who didn't have one. I don't think he ever had 5 minutes of pain from hemophilia. And, it was very tough. It was very tough on you.
Do you remember, I don't really remember the details, but how we went about, because eventually we went through immune tolerance, but I think my Bethesda unit was just too high for too long for us to try that right away, because we didn't try that for a few years, right?
I feel like we tried it as soon as it was offered to us in New York Hospital. I don't remember holding back. No, as soon as they put 2 and 2 together that you had an inhibitor, we started with the immunotherapy. For a couple of years, you took an injection every other day.
Was that just it? I was on immune therapy for a few years? Was that? Okay.
Took a few years.
Right. Because I remember that. And when we got off of that, on the other side of that, both
Your inhibitor was pretty much gone.
yeah, and then we had the synovectomies, which were also big steps forward in terms of getting a little more usage out of the joint and it being a little more protected. And then the introduction of prophylaxis, which, you know, I take for granted sometimes because of the treatment center that we were at, how there's still places in the country where prophylaxis is not a fully adopted practice, which is...
It's hard to believe that was so many years ago when you were on it.
And when we were talking about the support team, you know, a big part of the reason that I was on it and Adam, we were on it early, was because of who our hematologist was and because of the...
And because we were in New York City.
And at the Hemophilia Treatment Center specifically.
Right.
So what would you say about the value? You know, there's some statistic about, I forget what it is, 30-40% of people in the survey don't go to a Hemophilia Treatment Center. And I thought that number was quite high. And those are the people who responded to the survey.
Right.
You know, what about the people who didn't? Engaged people, right? So what about the disengaged? So there's still a lot of people that don't go to the treatment center. What is your take on the Hemophilia Treatment Center?
I think they're fantastic. I can't imagine not having gone to them. I mean, it was a long day. I remember being very stressed all day there because you saw 5-6 different specialists and then an hour and a half break for lunch. But everyone was so loving and kind, and Dr. Dee McKelly, it was just amazing to hear her speak, and the nurses, Eileen and Donna, and the physical therapists and the dentists and the genetic therapists, and it was a great experience. I mean, that to me was better than any support group I could have gone to. Once or twice a year we went in, and all my questions were answered, always.
Yeah, was there ever, I guess you just answered this, but was there ever a time where there was a question or a challenge or something that we had related to hemophilia that you felt wasn't adequately addressed through the treatment center?
No.
No.
Mm-mm.
So another question for you.
Yes.
Have you ever had your factor levels tested?
They did test mine back then, yeah. I'm low average.
Okay. And
I forget the numbers, but I was considered average but low.
Have you ever felt any symptoms? Or
I've had operations and I've never had any problems.
Did you have heavy menstrual periods?
No, actually I didn't or normal, yeah.
Okay.
No, we talk about that kind of stuff here on the BloodStream Podcast. Talk a lot about menstrual cycles.
I don't usually discuss that with Patrick.
Earmuffs, Patrick.
The bonding experience.
That's why I asked the question.
This is why this is Natalie's section of the interview.
And I just wanted to go back to when you found out that Patrick had hemophilia and you said you didn't even know how to spell the word. It was around the time Ryan White and the contamination crisis was happening. Were you privy to that as that was happening, and did that make you fearful in any ways? Or
I felt very blessed for exactly when Patrick was born, because he was 8 months old before he ever had factor, and by then we already knew about the connection. If I had had him 6 or 8 months earlier, he had been born, he would definitely have had AIDS. So they knew then when he got his first injection, and I felt very blessed that he was born when he was born.
And you felt comfortable that that was behind the community at that point.
I did feel comfortable, yeah. I mean, I didn't know all that was going to come out, of course, but they knew the blood connection then by the time he got his first injection, so they had isolated.
Yeah, just look at the clock there.
Yeah.
Did my diagnosis at all influence your thoughts about other kids or the family unit in general? Did you think maybe no more kids, or what? Did it impact that thinking in any way?
It didn't really. I mean, I had your brother 2.5 years later. You didn't seem to have a terrible life or anything up till that point anyway. I mean, you had pain coming in the years after that. But no, I didn't consider not having children. And actually, I knew Adam had hemophilia before he was born.
How so?
I had amniocentesis.
So they were able to test in utero?
Yeah.
And I know the answer to this question because you've shared it before, but can you share a little bit about different people kind of being in your ear about whether or not to even go through with the pregnancy once that was learned?
Oh, all the whole medical establishment wanted me to have an abortion. Everybody. All the doctors, all the nurses, the genetic doctor, Why would you go forward? Why would you do this? The only reason I had the amnio and I wanted to know we had hemophilia is because they almost used forceps on you. And if they had, that would have been a big nightmare. So I wanted special care, careful attention on Adam when he was born. So that's the only reason I had an amnio. But you seem to be very happy and having a good life, so why would I not have Adam?
That's a lot of pressure, though, to hear from doctor after doctor after doctor and friends and people like have an abortion.
Friends didn't say it.
Oh, friends didn't say it. So just, but the medical establishment people did say it. Did any part of you think, well, maybe I should be considering this?
No, never.
You were resolute the whole time?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Okay. So jumping ahead a little bit, while we didn't necessarily go to patient meetings or community things like that.
We went to camp.
And that's exactly where I'm going, is can you, from your perspective, talk about the value that camp had in my and Adam's life?
Well, you loved camp, right? You loved camp. We would drive up there and stay in Nancy's motel.
That's right. Very fancy place.
And you were only there 5 nights, I think, and then I would drive back up and get you. But I remember the first year or two when I picked you up, you were whimpering on the way home, crying because you were leaving. That's how much you loved it. And the camp was just amazing. The counselors, the way they made you kids feel. It was the best thing ever for you guys.
There's some parents who get nervous about, so most camps will start letting kids in at around 6, and some who feel like, oh, that's really young. I'm afraid to leave them. What would you say to anybody who spoke, fearfully like that about letting their kid go to a camp like Double H?
Well, I mean, it's practically 1-to-1 ratio. And anything can happen anywhere, even if they're home with you, right?
That's true.
So I just weighed the pros and the cons, and I really never worried when you were up there. I mean, anything could happen, but no, I don't think like that.
And along those lines, and I know it was different for Adam and for me, but something that also comes up a lot for parents is how to navigate kids who want to get involved in sports, who want to go do aggressive hiking, want to ski, want to play basketball, especially, the more aggressive kind of physical activities. How did you kind of think about navigating that as that became something? And I know Adam didn't push for that as much as I did, but he played soccer for a long time and was competitive with the soccer. He played into high school. Right? He played until they denied him. And then
he wasn't that good.
But he liked playing.
I mean, you were very into the street sports, and you were very into the football and the basketball and the running around.
I wasn't into football so much, but the rest of them.
But if I had to do it over again, I wouldn't have let you do as much.
Why do you say that?
I mean, being out here in Long Island, it's so sports oriented, and I feel like, your little joints got a lot of stress, extra bleeds they wouldn't have gotten. I mean, I had you in swimming, I had you in chess club, I tried to avoid...
Bowling, painting.
I wanted to put you in golf, you were a painter, but you wanted to do that stuff, and, I did let you do it, but, looking back, I wish I didn't. But it was hard to not let you, because that's all they do in Long Island.
Yeah, but I also feel like you engaged me in conversation about it. Like, I remember you saying things to me about, like, well, okay, if you want to go out and play and then get a bleed and you'll be limping on stage when you're 35 years old when acting
I said, and you'll blame me.
Like, I felt like, you weren't shy about your opinion, but you let me make the choices. So
I did, yeah.
I don't know, I guess we won't know this for a little while, but I don't know how you navigate that when you're a parent, but I like that I own my choices.
I don't know that you can really let a 10 or 12-year-old, own their choices.
But we're talking, so if we're speaking real specific, though, this was after the synovectomy. This was after I'd gotten over the inhibitor. This was on prophy when I was 13, 14. I'd already done a lot of damage, so my joints were already compromised. So I did have bleeding episodes as a result of doing things like going to the park, going to Edgemere to play basketball. But we had conversations about it when I was 13, 14, 15. And I think at 13, 14, 15, if you're of intellectual normalness, then you can have these conversations,
right,
and make your decisions.
That's true. Yeah.
And we hear enough stories about people who when their kids aren't encouraged to do the thing or aren't.
I didn't want you to become an emotional cripple. Like, hemophilia was not like something we thought about or talked about constantly. I just wanted you to have as much of a so-called normal life as possible. So that's why I let you do the things you did.
How did that go? How do you think that went?
I think it went very well.
Yeah.
Very happy with the outcome.
All right. So far, so good.
So if you could go back, you were saying, maybe you would potentially not have him be running around or going to play basketball. Is there anything else regarding his care or the diagnosis in childhood that you would have done differently, or anything now, knowing what you know now?
Well, I think knowing what I know now, you might have liked to belong to support groups, which I didn't encourage. Teenage support groups or something.
Yeah, it's not even so much. I mean, I don't know if support groups are quite the right way to characterize them. I think meeting other kids with hemophilia is really helpful because it's not just the joint stuff, but it's what you face in school. It's what you face in peer groups. It's what you wonder about at night. It is, whether you like it or not, it is a major part of your identity. I think when you have something chronically, it is. And some people manage that well by talking about it with others, and some people prefer to just kind of put it in the back of their mind and account for it differently. I think I would have benefited from knowing maybe more kids with hemophilia, but I do feel like camp gave me
and you kept
enough of what I
them.
needed. And just for clarity, when we talk about this camp, this was a medically diverse population, so it wasn't a hemophilia or bleeding disorder specific camp. Usually when we say camp within the bleeding disorders world, it's referring to one of these. In our talk of camp, it's kids with sickle cell and cerebral palsy and spina bifida and HIV. We don't really see much of either of those anymore in kids, at least. But that was kind of interesting too, because talk about it not emotionally stunting someone's growth. I remember at a very young age looking around that camp and seeing all these different diagnoses and all the ways it manifested in these kids, and realizing, wow, like I'm pretty lucky, and you can get like anything.
I felt you were pretty lucky also.
So I think I got my dose of community. But would that be is that one thing looking back that maybe you would have done differently?
I might have added that to your social life. Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else though?
No. Otherwise, I think I did okay.
I think you did too.
I agree.
So you lost Adam to hemophilia, and when Patrick was diagnosed, and then subsequently when you found out when Adam was in utero that he was diagnosed, was there ever an underlying fear that hemophilia would take a child away from you?
Never did I think it would happen. It was my understanding that things like that don't happen very often. So I was quite shocked that it happened, yeah.
So today, for thinking about other parents who today are learning about what it is to have hemophilia, and in some ways it's a great time because medicine, we have more medicines. There's this new medicine. There's all the more patient organizations and advocacy groups, and there's all kinds of like really great things. There's also so many different medications and so many differences in the insurance companies and the way they're changing all the time. That there's, I think, also more confusion and frustration that exists as well. It's a little bit simpler in, the late 90s when there was only a couple of products available. And things were just a little bit simpler. But do you have any advice, given what you learned as a parent, for parents who are just kind of being brought into the community in 2018?
I would say just try to take it, maybe not one day at a time, but try to stay in the present. Don't worry too much about the future, because in the end, we don't have too much control over that. Just enjoy your present, enjoy your child, and just live life in the present. That's what I do.
You do a good job of it. So we were talking just a little while ago about family history and how we didn't have any, but we did have some blood work done in the family after we were diagnosed to kind of trace it back. What exactly was done, and what did we learn from that?
Well, I was a carrier, so our treatment center asked me to get my parents' blood so they could send it to Johns Hopkins. So I think my mom went to a lab and had it drawn. My dad was older, and he lived in Jersey, so they gave me the tubes. I drove to Jersey, took the blood, and mailed it to them in a special envelope. And what I was told back then was that at my own dad's conception, he somehow got a damaged X chromosome. And that if he had, and that caused the hemophilia, the X chromosome, there was some damage there. So if they had just boys, it would have not showed anything. But because they had me, I became a carrier.
Right.
Of course, I had even had operations as a child. So there was no thought that I would have it. There was no people in my family that had any problem with bleeding. But that's where it started, apparently, at my dad's my own dad's conception.
Do you remember what him or your mom thought when you told them the origin?
We were all kind of interested in it, you know. It was there was no blaming or nothing like that, but you know, it made us understand it because we just didn't understand how where does a genetic disease start?
Right.
Because we had no history.
Right.
So that's where it started. You know, if my parents had just had boys, it never would have shown itself.
Did you find, was it interesting to any of your friends? Because you had a number of friends and cousins who had kids around the same time, you know, kids that I grew up with.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for the most part, at least as best as I know, everyone average health, no one else born with a chronic thing. Were there conversations with other friends who were either also new to having kids or were trying to get pregnant about, oh, you had it? Because, you know, like Natalie was just saying off mic, it's not like anyone who, when they're pregnant, rubs their belly and I wonder if there'll be a condition.
Yeah.
You know, like it's just a thing that happens.
Right.
Unless you have a family history and you know to look for something, it just happens. But do you remember any of those kind of conversations happening?
I don't really remember it. I remember being very shocked, very stunned. But as I said to you, because you were born when you were, after they knew the connection with the blood, I just felt very fortunate that you were going to live with it.
Right.
You know, that you weren't going to die. So I don't remember having any conversations with any friends about it, just my mother, really. And she was so encouraging and supportive and madly in love with you, so...
Do you know, did it ever come up at work as a nurse? I mean, especially the years where you were afloat and bouncing around.
In all the years I'm a nurse since 1979, I have never met anyone with hemophilia.
Von Willebrand disease that you're aware
No.
of? Wow.
Yeah.
That's-
It's rare, right?
Yeah, I mean, not that rare. It's still kind of amazing.
I mean,
It's a long time.
People come into the hospital, you read their medical history. I've never read about anybody having it.
I've always joked that outside of the medical arena or camp, the only other place I've ever seen hemophilia on a form where I had to fill something out was at the tattoo parlor. The only other place where they care about hemophilia
Well,
is
now if you donate blood, they care now.
right. That's
That
true
question
too.
is there.
I haven't tried in quite some time, so I already know the answer.
So when you fill out the paper for the tattoo, do you say yes?
No, I lie.
Do you really?
Yeah.
Because they wouldn't do it.
Probably not.
No.
And I have no intention on suing them, so I've already chosen my vendor. I feel like it's on me at this point, so I just lie and sign the paperwork. Probably shouldn't record that, but you know, that's the truth, everybody.
They just look to make sure there's no yes boxes checked,
Yeah,
and they're like,
exactly.
oh, no. Okay, cool, we can do this.
Yeah, exactly. That's all needed. I know the game we're playing when I go to the tattoo parlor, and I've done all my homework, so we're all good there. So you had said a little while ago that your one piece of advice would be about staying present. You kind of elaborated a little bit on that after we stopped recording initially. Why is that your number one piece of advice to new parents?
Well, because hemophilia aside, you know, you just don't know how long you're going to have your child. You can't assume that you're going to have them for a full lifetime, and just enjoy the time you have together. Don't get too focused on an illness or a condition. We don't have that much control over our future, right?
No, we don't. You were saying too about like worrying and how you weren't a worrier, you know, as a parent, and how Gran was a bit of a worrier, but that you weren't that. But maybe you should have been more of a worrier.
Right.
Why do you say that though?
I mean, I'm sure if I was more of a worrier, what happened would still have happened, you know, with Adam. But sometimes I think, you know, if he was home with me and he hadn't gone away to school, you know, things wouldn't have worked out that way. But then again, you went away to school and you did fine. So,
Right.
and plenty of people go away to college and die for other reasons,
Yeah, I mean,
you know.
I think he's unfortunately just a victim of, to a degree, randomness. I mean, I don't know that you
It
could
is
have
randomness,
you could have
yeah.
done anything differently. And like you
Right.
said, because that was the thing that always bothered me, is we grew up in the same house, we had the same condition, we had the same parent, we had the same clinician, we knew all the same things. How come he was able to fall off and I never did? And you know what I brought it down to is that identification thing. It's like, well, I always wanted to be physical, and I got bleeds as a result of it.
And he had an
didn't.
easy life, yeah.
I had an inhibitor. He didn't. You know, I think I always was aware of it, and he wasn't.
Right.
But that's I don't know. You can only, I don't know how much more you can do if somebody's just not. I mean, I guess there's ways. If he had been, there's a butterfly effect, right? Like,
Right.
to a degree, it's kind of fruitless because
It is.
no revisionist history changes the present,
Right.
and there's no way to know. Like, you change one thing, you change everything.
Right.
So who knows? Who
Exactly.
really knows? But
I would do it all over again. I'm happy with how everything went in my life in general.
he would have turned 30 this year. I just realized.
I know.
2018.
Yeah.
That's weird. I just turned 30. It wasn't that long ago.
Right. It's a lot of years gone by.
2 years ago.
Whoa. How was your first podcast experience?
It's very good.
Yeah. What was that gesture? They can't see the gestures. What was that? Does that mean done? Does that mean I'm done?
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so
Mom.
much.
Thank you, Susan.
There you have it. Susan Marie Lynch giving her take on this, that, and the other thing. Thanks again, Mom, for coming on the podcast. And yeah, some interesting stuff came up in that. What stood out for you from that? Just one or two things that stood out for you.
That she, despite her nursing background, had never heard of hemophilia until that word was said about you.
Never heard of it. And since 1979, she's been working as a
has not
nurse
had a single patient
with hemophilia or diagnosed von Willebrand disease. I can't imagine she hasn't come across somebody with von Willebrand disease, but at least nobody for whom it was in their charts.
Yeah.
So kind of amazing. Just goes to show like how
Rare and special you are.
Yeah, thank you.
In this community.
But mostly me. No, that's interesting and illuminating too. And she's someone who also spent a lot of time, by the way, in the ER when she was a float nurse being sent to any particular place in the hospital. I think technically she wasn't supposed to be sent to the ER because you need additional training, but they did it anyway. Sorry to blow up everybody's spot, but water under the bridge. But in the ER, we talk about that all the time with hemophilia. If you walk into the ER and you just say hemophilia and shrug your shoulders, good luck. Like, you've got to be ready to go to the ER because they don't know anything about hemophilia, and you're at the emergency room. So you're obviously not in a position where, being able to kind of like slowly assess, and you got to move if you're in the ER, theoretically. Also, we teased this just before the interview, but the fact that when she found out that Adam had hemophilia in utero, as she put it, the entire medical establishment was pushing her toward an abortion, which is incredible. I mean, Adam was born in July of 1988, so we were well past the blood contamination crisis. Hemophilia was managed, treated. Like she states, she had a healthy, toddler running around, just kind of happy, loving life.
I mean, I'm sure there's still parts of the country where that's pushed.
We hear it all the time.
Yeah.
Powering Through conversations, it comes up all the time. Poweringthrough.org comes up all the time. And it continues to amaze me, though. It doesn't surprise me, but it's just amazing that something that, frankly, is so easily treated, it has this stigma around it within general medical establishment that leads them to advocate for abortion. And it's like, this is why we need to educate more clinicians, is they're still lagging behind. If people can be telling expecting mothers to abort their children who are diagnosed with hemophilia in utero, then we're lagging behind in some necessary education.
Yeah. And should all the options be made available? Yes. Should the information be given and, this is an option if you so choose, but to push for or to say...
Well, and the options should include, if you're going to tell, hey, kid has hemophilia, do you even know what hemophilia is? I can't imagine if you just went to NHF's website or HFA or WFH's website and looked up like, hey, give me a 2-minute snapshot of hemophilia in 2018, and you read what you could read, why would you push for an abortion? If you're looking at data from 1942, then I could understand. You're like, hey, life expectancy is 15. Let's maybe say no. But look at what it is today.
Yeah.
It's so fundamentally wrong, and that bothers me.
Yeah. I mean, it's people pushing their own agendas.
Goes back to that service thing and paying for service, and yeah.
Anyway.
Anywho, thanks, Mom. Thanks for bringing up abortion on the BloodStream podcast, Mom. No, but
if we
thanks,
don't
Mom.
talk about controversial topics enough, throwing another one in there.
Really coming at it left, right, and center here. All right. Thanks again, Mom. And we'll have another great interview segment on next month's episode. All right. One last thing before we go. As always, the parting shot. A final word, bleeding disorders related or otherwise, for both Natalie and I to leave you with before signing off and saying goodbye until the next episode. Before we get to the parting shot, though, a quick thank you once again to Shire, the premier and exclusive sponsor of the BloodStream podcast. We appreciate your support. Thank you, Shire. Okay, Natalie, parting shot for the January episode 2018, the BloodStream podcast, January 15th, 2017.
18.
Oh, I was so close. All right. So 2018.
But here we go.
What is
Here I go.
Your parting shot.
So my parting shot is, be it the new year, there's always discuss of resolutions.
Mm-hmm.
I read an interesting fact that only 8% of New Year's resolutions that are made are kept.
I've never been polled. I don't know who they asking about this. I was never polled.
But what I wanted to share was something interesting, a little tradition we started this year on New Year's Eve, writing something we want to let go of and leaving it behind in 2017. That feels a little bit more, I don't know, instead of like, I'm going to lose 45 pounds by the end of the year. Like, it's just like, I'm just not going to do this anymore. Like, this will not serve me in 2018, and I'm going to leave it behind. So, yeah, it just felt nice to do that.
I like that. Yeah, something that you don't have to carry any longer.
Yeah.
Just leave it behind.
We wrote it on paper and burned it,
It was
which
very
is kind
dramatic.
of fun and,
Ritualistic.
ceremonious.
Yeah. It's very good. I appreciate it. Brought me back to my Catholic school days of being in the church when they were just kind of always burning things. There's frankincense and myrrh and incense, or maybe those were the gifts. I don't know. But lots of things were burning. It smelled great.
Yeah, so I'm glad I could bring you back to your schoolboy days.
Thank you.
But so what's your parting shot?
My parting shot. In Syria, a young girl with hemophilia was rescued from a besieged rebel enclave along with 3 others who were also sent to a hospital in Damascus as a result of an agreement struck between the Syrian government, the militant faction, and the International Committee of the Red Cross. In the UK, a British woman received $12 million for the wrongful birth of her son, who was born with hemophilia and autism. The courts sided with the woman, who claimed that if the medical professionals had given her the, quote, correct information about her unborn child, that she would have had an abortion. The presiding official, Justice Yip, stated, her love for her son shone through from her written statements. She went out of her way to argue that her son was not an unwanted child. She had specifically, however, sought to avoid bringing a child with hemophilia into the world, knowing the suffering that the condition causes. The woman had been tested following the diagnosis of her nephew with hemophilia, but she was told that she was, quote, all clear, and she clearly was not. So the justice granted her $12 million for costs related to her child's autism diagnosis as a result of an unwanted birth. And finally, dogtime.com released an article titled Von Willebrand Disease in Dogs. It has such incredible information, such as von Willebrand disease is a hereditary condition in dogs passed down from the parents. There have been reports of von Willebrand disease in over 50 breeds of study. Over 70% of Dobermans were carriers of the disease, although most showed no symptoms. These 3 different stories are all just ways to remind us once again of how different bleeding disorders can look depending on where in the world you're born and how many legs you have. There are links to all 3 stories, along with all the stories brought up today on the BloodStream podcast in the program notes and on bloodstreampod.com. And that is all for this episode. You can check out BloodStreamMedia.com and subscribe to the BloodStream Podcast, the Ask the Expert Podcast, the Powering Through Podcast, and the Bloodline Podcast to hear all of BloodStream Media's podcasts for the bleeding disorders community. You can email us at mailbag@BloodStreamMedia.com. You'll also find Bloodstream on Facebook.com/BloodStreamMedia and on Twitter @BloodstreamInfo. This episode of the BloodStream Podcast was written by Patrick James Lynch and Natalie Lynch, produced by Patrick James Lynch, Ryan Gielen, Rob Bradford, Andrew Gall, Josh Bragg, Ava Freeman, Heather Robb, and Colby Crow. Special thanks to everyone at the BloodStream Podcast and Believe Limited, the National Hemophilia Foundation, Entertainment to Effect Change, the Hemophilia Alliance, and Shire. Thanks as well to Share segment contributor Mark Kenny and sit-down segment guest Susan Lynch. Hi, Mom. Reminder to check out the program notes for this episode in your podcast player or on bloodstreampod.com for links and additional information about the various stories featured on this episode. My name is Patrick James Lynch.
And I'm Natalie Lynch.
And until next time, take self-care of yourself.